Thank you, Dennis, for your great intention talk. I think anytime suffering appears inside of us, that it points points us in a certain direction if we're paying attention. So usually you think about suffering, you think about avoiding it or relieving it, or how am I going to get out of this particular scrape? So about a month ago, I was in the airport in Singapore flying to Vienna, but that didn't turn out so well. So here I am in Lawrence, Kansas now. So, I mean, that's not a very big deal, but not much suffering. But you know, things turn out most of the time different than what you think. So one thing that this disruptive kind of thing leads to, and Dennis mentioned this, is that it leads to, first of all, it leads to suffering because you want something and you didn't get it. But if you look at it more closely, it leads to you to investigate life and what it's all about. So in Zen, we call this the great question of life and death. So in Buddhism, we say everything that the Buddha taught about was about suffering and taking away suffering. So in the midst of all of that, of course, is this intention. So human beings are beings of intention. And how do we use this intention to take away this suffering that we all experience? So this suffering can be very small. Like this morning, I had trouble getting the toilet paper on the roll, on the dispenser, on the wall, and then, right? So that's very small, humorous kind of suffering. And then at the same, about 10 minutes later, I got this message from Europe that my old nun friend had died. And that's the other end of the scale. But all of these come ultimately from wanting something. Of course, this wanting is the essential ingredient that causes suffering and the essential ingredient in our intention. So the big message behind Buddhism is finding your true self and helping the world. That's what, of course, Zen is about. So all the teaching, talks like this, talks like Dennis's, all the sutras, everything, it isn't exactly to explain anything to you. You know, it isn't a wonderful phenomenology or philosophy or something, but all of these things are teachings which are pointing you towards finding your true self and helping the world. So that's what lies behind Dennis's talk and all of Buddhism, finding your true self and helping the world. So the Buddha saw old age, sickness, and death. So, well, we're kind of obviously locked into the second one, sickness, and it comes very prominently to our attention because of the COVID-19 thing and all the press around it and all the suffering that's around us. It may even involve you personally, right? I don't happen to know anybody that has it, but certainly people around me think they've had it or they suffer from the symptoms. I may have suffered from the symptoms myself about 4 months ago. So anyway, that just kind of writes large what we all deal with moment to moment in our life, and that's human suffering. Old age, sickness, and death, of course, are the three things that, unless you die early, you're going to experience. So that experience, that direct experience, leads to this great question, and this great question leads us to practice with clear intention, and that leads us to help the world. So that's the Buddha's job, that's my job, that's your job. So are there any questions this morning? My job is actually not to give a talk, but to answer some questions. So if you have any questions about this or anything actually, please ask.
I was wondering, if there's a, when you practice, is there's a constant element, which is you're always just sitting there, and there maybe is a variable aspect because you're not, it's a different day, you're feeling different things. How do you conceive of that balance versus variability?
Right. So we just sat for, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes there. So the thoughts that were going through your mind are completely new, right? You don't know what they're going to be. They just pop up. So anytime you sit, it's always about coming back to just this moment, right? So it's always just this moment. Actually, you can't practice in the past and you can't practice in the future. It's always just now. So the essence of any kind of meditation practice, whether it's Hinduism, Taoism, Chinese Buddhism, Korean Buddhism, or Zen, any kind of Zen, is always about keeping this just now mind. So just now is always changing, 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 but this just now is always just now. So that's the thing that anchors us to our life and our great intention is this just now mind. So it's about a waking up just now. So in the Diamond Sutra, it says you can't hold on to past mind. You can't grasp present mind and the future mind. Who the heck knows what that is off in the future? So what that leaves you with is this just now mind and how to use that to help the world since we are beings of intention. So that's the big question is, well, what are you doing right now? And why do that, right? So this is all really simple. It doesn't take a great intellect or anything. Everybody experiences it. So what it means and what the Buddha discovered is that we all have this capability of connecting with the whole world right here, right now. That's the way he talked about it, right? So, wow, this is great. Everybody already has it, but nobody knows that they haven't because they don't know they have it, meaning Buddha nature. Because they don't know they have it, they suffer. So this taking away suffer at its essence is uh, letting go and returning to what you already are. You already are this Buddha nature if you can just let go of all of your ideas. So it isn't about getting rid of your ideas, it's about letting go of your ideas and returning to just this moment. So that occurs every moment. So every moment you might think, you can think about it, of course, is different, but it's about returning to just now. And behind that is this great intention. How can I use what I have just now to help the world? So maybe it's meditating, maybe it's washing the dishes, maybe it's going to dinner with your husband. All of those things, if they're clear and the intention behind them is clear, then it leads to the end of suffering. If it isn't, of course, it just perpetuates suffering in this moment. So it's not anything special because this moment also has just gone by. So everything is about letting go, returning to your true self, helping the world. But if we compress it all down, it's in this moment, just do it. If you just do it with clarity and without it being attached to desire, anger, and ignorance, then that is life. That's a human being's life with clear, true intention. So I wouldn't, you can notice that, but you wouldn't want to attach to that thought. Okay, so everything's always changed. Don't attach to that thought. So all of those are just words that are used to, we think, understand this situation, but actually it's all about attaining this situation just now and helping the world. Okay? Any other questions?
Dae Kwang Sunim.
Yes.
Since I was just thinking, I've talked and I've asked Stan and Judy both before about this, and I've heard their teaching on this or their take on it. But how do you suggest to your students that they work on kong-ans in their homework? Do you have any recommendation for that?
Yeah, my recommendation is don't work on the kong-an. And there's a reason for that, because in our life, you probably notice this if you're an academic, that there's two kinds of questions. There's thinking questions, and then there's before thinking questions. So if I ask you how to get to the Merc, you probably know how to get to the Merc from your house, right? And if somebody asks you, you can probably point out to them how to get to the Merc. So that's a kind of thinking question. So I know the Merc is somewhere up there on 9th and Iowa somewhere, and I can mostly direct people to there if they're in Lawrence. So that's a kind of thinking question. But then there's what we call in Zen and Buddhism a before thinking question. So when the Buddha encountered old age, sickness, and death, it brought up the great question of life and death, which happens to be this before thinking question. So right away, he realized that he didn't have a solution to what he was confronting, right? It just gave him what we call don't know. It stopped his thinking, right? Well, old age, sickness, and death, how do we get out of this? Well, thinking isn't going to help you, right? So that gave him this great question. So the great question of life and death is actually before thinking question. So this great question comes in all kinds of shapes, sizes, and forms. And essentially all of the traditional 1700 kong-ans, they're all the kong-ans you might encounter in our school, like the 12 gates. Those are all examples of different forms of this great question. And they're all before thinking questions. So actually, we talk about working on a kong-an, or we may say, oh, what is your homework kong-an? You know, we all use all those terms, but all those terms are pointing towards, ultimately, towards the great question of life and death. And the kong-an itself is an example, a very clever example, that was introduced into Chinese Buddhism around the time of the sixth patriarch in the late part of the 600s. To give you a question which the more you think about it, the more you can answer. As soon as you let go, it allows or points towards or demonstrates to you your before thinking, your intuitive self, your true self answers the question, right? And then we say, you answered the question. Actually, you didn't do it. Your intuitive Buddha nature, self, whatever you want to call it, answered that question. So in a way, kong-ans are evocative. So they evoke the functioning of your true self. That's their job. So they're actually a do it, they're not a think it. I'm always saying life is not a think it, it's actually a do it. And so when the sixth patriarch hears this thing about past life or past mind can't get enlightenment, the way Zen Master Dae Kwang translated, present mind getting enlightenment, future mind getting enlightenment. So behind that is always this great question, what are you really? So that's the great question of life and death. What am I really? And of course, that statement itself is wrong. So you have to cut through that statement to see what's actually behind it. And what's behind it is something like the Buddha seeing this, the morning star, then boom, he wakes up to what he really is, right? So he isn't sitting there reading a book. He isn't pondering German philosophy or something. He's just sitting there, and all of his experiences of suffering in life and trying to solve the problem and everything, he, for a moment, lets go of his thinking, and he sees the star. And in that experience, he experiences becoming one, which is, of course, your true way of talking about becoming your true nature. So boom, he gets it. So that's the purpose of the kong-an. So I would say, if I say to you, oh, you should work on a kong-an, I'm actually, it has a behind meaning, and the behind meaning is don't work on the kong-an, because work on can mean think about, ponder, Google or whatever, and that isn't going to lead to the answer to the kong-an. What's going to lead to the answer to the kong-an is becoming one with the kong-an. But that's our job, moment to moment in our life. So it evokes an experience of our true self. That's the kong-an's job. So I would say, don't work on it. Okay. Any other questions? So I want to thank you for joining us all together today under these circumstances. It's funny how you get together, you know, I was thinking the other day, wow, this Zoom stuff is a little bit limiting. You know, you can't smell the other person. You can't, since you're not present with them, you don't sense everything that you actually sense when you're with another person. But on the other hand, even with you're with another person, if you're wrapped up in your thinking and your like and dislike of them or anything that they're doing or anything you're doing, then you're not connecting exactly with them either. And it's not that those things are good or bad. They're not good or bad. In fact, they're natural and they're very useful. However, you don't want to attach to them. So when the sixth patriarch gets enlightenment, he has this this experience of his true self when he hears this sentence out of the Diamond Sutra: when thinking arises in your mind, don't attach to it. So that's a very interesting teaching. And for him, he got it from hearing a line out of a sutra. Buddha got it from seeing the morning star. Or Wang Po hits Lin Chi over the head with a stick, and he doesn't really get it until later when he's talking to Dae Zen Master, that, oh, wait, that was it, right? So he wakes up talking to a teacher, explaining to him how wonderful it was that he got the crap beat out of him by Wang Po Zen Master. So you never know what's going to do it. But if you're paying attention, just waking up in this moment is it. And there's many, 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 many techniques for that. But they all have the same job, and that is your job. That's my job. That was Buddha's job. That's to wake up this moment and help the world. So that's Zen. Wake up to your self, true self at this moment and help the world. So that's not special, but we say it's special so that you'll pay attention. And hopefully this pay attention will wake you up to your true intention, your great intention, which is the great vow, help the world. So I want to thank you all for listening this morning. And most important is wake up. Okay, just now. That's it. Thank you.